support of the Stitching History Together event and exhibit. You may have heard of us already, but just a brief background. Sarah and Lisa and a group of 3 other sewists are going to be here the last week of July.
The second to last week.
The 22nd to the 26th, to be specific. And they are going to, live in front of everyone over the course of the week, recreate the dress, this Abigail Adams dress. So they'll talk a little bit more about how they're going to do that and what that's going to look like in their talk, but that'll be accompanied with an exhibit as well. So you can watch them and then peruse in here to learn a little bit more about that as well. But I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging that we gather on the traditional lands and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through generations. To introduce our speakers, Sarah Walsh is an independent researcher, school librarian, and educator who became involved in living history through theater. In 2015, she played Abigail Adams in the first fully staged, all-female, non-binary production of 1776. A year later, she was invited to portray Abigail with an 18th century reenactment group and launched into studying Abigail's life and letters in earnest. Having learned machine sewing from her mother at the age of 10, Sarah is now using historical clothing construction techniques and skills to create a wardrobe spanning the years of Abigail's life. On Instagram, she's pins.abigail and regularly shares updates about her 18th and 19th century sewing projects and research. She lives with her family in the Washington, D.C. area and has given first-person programs for a variety of sites and organizations, including History at Play, the DAR Museum, City Tavern, Mount Harmon Plantation, and Historic Port Royal. Lisa, a visit to Mount Vernon in 2017 on the 4th of July inspired Lisa to try her hand at 18th century style clothing. She made a pair of stays from a kit and fell in love with the era. Since then, she has completed 12 formal courses in original practice construction and cutting for the 18th century. She has studied exacted garments held at the Laurel Historical Society, the Art Museum of Colonial Williamsburg, the Darnell Fashion Collection, and the Genesee Country Village and Museum. Lisa has fully hand-sewn several full 18th century ensembles, including 1730s silk mantua, 3 1760s English gowns, 2 1780s Italian gowns in linen, and a late 1780s riding habit. She's also done her share of plain sewing by making many shifts, petticoats, neckerchiefs, and men's shirts. Sarah and Lisa have been friends and sewing fitting companions for years, and this collaboration is a perfect blending of their shared skills and interests. So I will turn the floor over to the 2 of you. Thank you all for being here.
Gown. This is the, this gown, just a brief little background on it. It was donated to Buttonwoods in 1944 by a descendant of Abigail's sister, Mary. And the family provenance is that Abigail sent this gown home to Mary from London when she was there on a diplomatic mission with John in 1785. That's the family story, and I have not been able to verify it. But it has passed down through, generations of Haverhill history. Both Abigail's sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, married Haverhill men and settled in Haverhill. And that's, connected to that family's history in a very clear way. However, what's really interesting to us is what else we can tell about this gown, about the garment industry, the textile industry in general. When you kind of sweep aside, yes, it was owned by a famous family. So that's kind of the overall context. So thank you very much for the land acknowledgement. Did you want to take?
That was enough, yeah. So the other piece we wanted to do, and this is going to be really important when we do the production in the gallery space next month, is that it's very important to us to bring to the fore the discussion the people who actually made the garments. So yes, the garment got held and protected and saved partly because of who owned it or was associated with it, but ultimately there is I won't call it an army, but there's a small but significant group of people who had to come together figuratively to make this gown, and that is still the case. So you might think about, do you know where your clothes are made, and do you know the person who makes your clothes? What are their conditions like? Similarly, the people who actually wove, managed, finished the fabric, cut the gown, sewed it, and then subsequently altered and cared for that garment for generations are unknown to us, but I like to call that their names were once known. That doesn't mean they're not important and they don't exist. We just don't have that documentation anymore. And similarly, we learned how to do this kind of sewing and do this kind of work and wear these kinds of things through a community. It takes a community of people, artisans, similar, fellow enthusiasts, and honestly merchants to be able to get dressed in these garments and to wear them properly, or just for fun. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect all the time. And then also the idea being about kind of why does that matter? Why do we care? Why would we do it? It is fun to play dress up and be a little princess, but ultimately it's about bringing to fore intersectionality around what people are involved in this kind of activity, both in the past and now, and also whose stories get told. So I actually do a lot of little miniature shorter videos about why it matters. Yes, I like the clothes. Yes, I like making stuff. It's fun to be a pretty princess, but ultimately, why do we care and why are we interpreting this part of the past and trying to embody it in some way? And it's because we find meaning in that kind of relationship with history.
Yeah. So, just a little bit of kind of background on the language that we will be using in talking about historic garments, historical textiles, all of that. So when we say extant, we're talking about a surviving antique garment. And extant is a really handy term because you can use it for really anything, shoes, breeches, dress, an extant from the past that is still available to us, whether in a museum collection or, in someone's attic. It's
Stuffed into a bag.
yeah, exactly. So that means, an authentic garment from the past. So talking about warp and weft, we're talking about the actual directionality of the textile fibers. So warp is the long ways fibers that are placed on the loom, weft the fibers that get woven crossways. Selvage, many spellings exist of selvage, but that's the hard woven edges of a bolt of fabric that is less likely to fray, can sometimes fray, but is less likely to fray. And then guts, we're talking about the insides of the garment that you can't always see when you're looking at a museum display or a photograph or, a drawing of a gown. You might not be able to see all of the sort of construction, the seams, the linings, all of those innards. And then talking about fiber versus weave, we're looking at, is it silk, is it cotton, is it linen, is it wool? Those are the available materials when you're talking about historical garments before 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, 20s, 10s.
When you're getting in like rayon and other synthetic fibers. So cotton, linen, wool, and silk, but you can have many different weaves of those fibers. So a satin is a weave, can be made of silk, can be made of wool, and you're looking at the actual structure of the fiber in that case. There we go. So what are we looking for in an extant garment? Do you want to take that?
What we're looking for, why would we do this study? Why would we object-based study like this? We're looking for overall shape, which we can get through measurements, but also the construction technique. So, for example, today in our study of the gown, we found a lot of places where appliques were used, where they're not normally, at least in specific periods. So we have some speculations as to why they might have been doing that. But also you want to get a sense of measurements. The first thing a lot of people say when they walk in and see this gown is that it's so tiny. It does look tiny. It isn't a giant garment, but it looks tiny partly because it only goes to about here. The neck is very wide and low, and because of alterations, the skirt has also been pulled up. So it's got a very short waist. So if you were to lay down a garment with similar proportions for a larger person, it would still look pretty tiny.
The other thing about measurements is that measurements don't tell you about a person's actual body. You can have two people who have a 34-inch bust and a 30-inch waist and 40-inch hips and be completely different body shapes and height and squish and all of that. So measurements and laying a gown out flat can only tell you so much.
Posture, scoliosis, they could have changes to the body due to pregnancy or childbirth or injury. So there's lots of things like that. The other thing that we look for is alterations. So it gives a sense of the life cycle of the gown. I think Sarah will talk about this a little bit more, but the main things to look for in alterations is you can't always be sure something was actually altered, although often things are altered or at least mended. But one of the nice things that you can do to help yourself, assuming that you're able to actually look at the garment that closely, is there are these little microscopes you can use to actually look at the threads and see what they're made out of, because there's periods where different fibers are more popular for different threads. And even if you can get down to looking at the twist on the thread, how it is twisted can also tell you what era it was produced, because there's also been fads in how people do that. For example, linen that is hand spun by an experienced person will first of all look very, very smooth, but also it will be twisted in a specific way that you can do. You can twist it the other way, the way you would do cotton, but it won't be as happy and it will fall apart. So generally, if you find a linen thread in a garment this old and it's still in good shape, that means it was hand spun, which probably means it was original. We also look for evidence of wear. So there is sometimes something that happens with silk called shattering, where just the material used to dye it degrades it over time. Sunlight, sweat, sunlight can also do that. Rust smoke can do that. Sebum in general can do that. So if it's a garment that's worn with a waterproof style other garment over touching it, you might have damage from that. But the other major evidence of wear will be repairs. It will be mending. It will be places where the fabric has stretched or shattered because it was pulled mightily against its own interests. There's a photograph we have on those books back there where a young lady is wearing what appears to be an 18th century style shaped gown over an 19th century style corset, and that bodice is fighting for its life. And so if that bodice survives, I promise you there is a little strain mark all along here and probably all along here, because you can almost imagine the pins just cracking as she turns. So yeah, it's a problem. So then the other thing we look for is any evidence of provenance and ownership. So this is less of a big thing because in this period and area, people, especially if they had enough money, really had access to everything that exists on the globe. But in other communities, you might look for, did this person have access to cotton earlier than most people did? Did this person have access to raiment when it was still a very, very unusual fabric in the West? And the opposite is true. You go to Japan, you find someone with a fine wool suit before they opened up trade widely. That is quite surprising. So that is one of the things that we look for, is any kind of evidence that shows us at least locality of the garment.
Yeah.
So.
And again, sometimes the family story of how, this gown ended up in, our attic, maybe a little bit embellished or,
Just that. I think it's also very normal for people like the thread, the chain of evidence for anything, any object that a family cherishes
Yeah.
can become loose depending on what other structures that family might find themselves under. So, grandma said that this was from, Sri Lanka, and then you go and turn it over and there's a little made in China sticker. Like, you're not gonna be like, no, grandma, that's wrong. So then it becomes like, the grandkid who heard that goes, oh, it's from Sri Lanka. Oh, it's family heirloom. And you're like, it's from China. So like nothing wrong with things from China, but that's not what the family story becomes divorced from reality on accident sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So if you can't actually examine a garment in person, there are some things you can do to study something from, a historical collection. If it's allowed, you can sometimes download images from the museum. There's, a lot of museums now are making images available using Creative Commons. They have kind of a blanket license, double check, to be sure, but museum images are becoming more and more accessible. Ask for help. Email the museum, call them, talk to somebody there. The point of a museum is for things to be seen and shared and enjoyed, you would hope. And they're usually delighted, in my experience, to, if they have archival images or, records that are not on public view or whatever, to share what they have. If they say, please don't share these with anybody, or, please keep these for just your use or non-commercial use or whatever, follow those guidelines. See if there are other garments or other extents that kind of are similar to what you're studying. And then, zoom way in on those images that you have while questioning your life choices.
Preferably at 3 in the morning.
3 in the morning is the best time to be doing that. Minute details are... So this is a case in point. This is a gown from the Victoria and Albert Museum.
I know this.
Sorry. So that's awesome. So a few years into my research about Abigail Adams, I read her letters to her sister about the death of George Washington. And it was 2 years into John Adams' presidency, and they found themselves facing another first, which was, we need to now honor a former president who has died. There were no other former presidents yet, so this was, setting a protocol, setting a precedent for how to honor him on a national level, on a personal level, all of that. And Abigail wrote to her sister, I shall not have occasion now for anything but black until spring. He died in...
December 14th, 1799.
There you go.
Yeah.
This is a Martha Washington interpreter, friends, in case you did not know. He died in December of 1799, and Abigail wrote out to her sister, I don't need anything except black clothing until spring. And her daughter wanted a white gown, as she will start wearing white trimmed with black, but at the present, the whole family are in full mourning. Now, Abigail and John had been in London, in Paris, when there were entire, court mourning for, I think a prince had died and a, elderly statesperson had died, and they saw how European courts handled these events. I don't know for certain exactly what Abigail ended up wearing when she was in public, but she wrote also extensively about what other people were wearing at the salons that she hosted. So for full mourning, this gown from the V&A was kind of my touch point of, it's from 1795, and it seems like a reasonable place to start when looking for inspiration for a gown such as Abigail might have worn in 1799 to go into full mourning. And this was my result. It's a little hard to see because it's so dark, but the back pleats were really my kind of challenge to myself. Can I do this in fabric and have it come out looking pretty much like the original? took inspiration for this gown was the back, and then, so what I did here, I folded the fabric in half and stitched down to the high waistline at an angle, and then as the pleats come in, it's all still on the straight of grain, creating this like diamond shape. But this is all speculation as to how it was actually made, because the V&A didn't have any pictures of the guts.
What's the benefit of the button that was on the back?
That I don't actually know. And the V&A doesn't really explain it either. It just says there are buttons at the top of the back.
It looks good, or shawl would be attached
So
to it.
that's a feature you see a lot in that period, and I believe it was usually, it would keep your cape from riding up against your back and your neck, because the idea was to keep everything, because that neckline's very high.
Yeah, that neckline, I didn't show the whole thing, but it comes way up, like under,
So
up to
that
here.
turns into a problem, especially if you have sloping shoulders, that your cloak kind of slowly rises up. Because especially with the bust being so high in that garment, it just means everything kind of ends up riding up along your neck.
Yeah.
And so to have any kind of elegance to your neck, you want to keep everything else down.
Yeah. So, like I said, I did a lot of guesswork in, getting this pleated to the right scale and the right, this was definitely zooming in at 3 in the morning on how big are these individual pleats? Where are they stitched down? How far are they from, the bodice point? So this is all fully pleated and laid down on the lining pieces, ready to be stitched down to the linen lining. And like I said, so this back pleating, extravaganza was really the only thing I took inspiration from. The rest of it, I used a commercial pattern for a typical 1795 gown, again, because I really had very little else to go on. But this shows kind of that, diamond shape that everything for these bodices starting in the late 1790s is kind of based on. Now the V&A actually does say that the gown in their collection was probably altered from an older style gown, because there's so much volume that got pleated way down into that back, and the skirt was a lot of fabric to kind of bring in for these sort of more columnar straight up and down styles. So again, it was mostly guesswork for that one. This is another one that I recreated. This was from a gown at LACMA, LA County Museum of Art, around 1785, 1790. I was drawn to it because of the gorgeous purple stripes. Purple's my favorite color, and I was like, I should have that gown, absolutely. But this was another one. They had one archival image they could send me of the gown kind of laid out, taken from the pen end, looking toward the top of the gown. So what that showed me was the flap construction of the front, because this is covered up by a fichu. Why do museums do that? Why do they cover up the construction details when they mount them? Yes, you want to see kind of what the gown would look like when it's worn, but it really makes it hard sometimes to see all of those construction details that you want to have when you're making it. So it showed me that the flaps, it's not what we would now call kind of a full zone front. It's more kind of a modified zone front where the flaps start like right around here. They don't meet in the middle. Don't know why. So I was using a diagram from Diderot from 1787 of a gown, just kind of to check the shapes that I was coming up with as I draped what I saw onto a dress form. The sleeve was, so LACMA actually has this fabulous online repository of patterns they have taken from various garments in their collection. So this was a redingote that had a very similar cut to this gown, and I drafted out the sleeve using gridded paper and the grid of my cutting board to just kind of wing it and go for it. And again, this is strictly just because the gown wasn't on view, I couldn't make an appointment to go see it, it was in storage, off-site somewhere when I first called them, and was just kind of using, you know, the tools available online. And there's me! In the gown! And these bustly bits at the back, I was extremely pleased with how well that matched the fall of the gown on the original. I was really, really happy with that. So, you know, this is from just a lot of guesswork, speculation, hoping I got it right, and, you know, just staring again at these images at 3 in the morning to make sure that what I was doing was pretty close.
Is it cotton?
This is a silk, actually, and I got it custom woven.
Sourcing it, yeah.
Yes, I got it custom woven in Cambodia. So a lady who had an Etsy shop selling silk pajamas in this like candy stripe in various colors, worked with her weaver in Cambodia to create the purple custom. And then I had to get, I think, 75 yards of it, and I posted on the Facebook group, hey, does anybody else want purple candy stripe silk? And a bunch of people jumped in, and we, you know.
Community.
Exactly. So that's kind of looking at the process from the detective work of just hoping that what I'm, you know, creating is a pretty good approximation. Both of those gowns, this one and the black one, you know, completely hand-sewn, you know, historical construction methods, but I can't be certain that how I put them together or, you know, what I did to kind of get them to these places was exactly how those gowns were made. But, you know, just kind of working based on what I knew from having hand-sewn other gowns and studying other gowns and looking at, you know, the resources available. Yeah, I was pretty pleased with both of those results. And again, you know, we're going to talk more about kind of the actual, you know, what you can glean from looking at the extant. But that's, you know, best as I could do from from not being able to see them.
Can we take pics?
By all means, yeah, go right ahead. And then you got me. You did? You get a picture?
Yeah, go sure. Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what kind of wearing the gowns tells you versus just being able to lay them down flat and say, you know, I made this gown and it matches this other one. So these are 3 different gowns I made. In these pictures, I'm wearing the same undergarments. So I have a petticoat, stays, the same shoes, and a bum roll, like big pad split bum thing. It's my most extreme one. And what's funny is, and this is really interesting, and I wasn't sure this was going to make a difference, because I had never done like in the same time like that. And my husband was learning how to use our camera, so that's also why it looks so weird. But but same stays, same everything, same body, same day. And this gown is the one that is a full English back. So it has a slightly wider section where the pleats are attached to the bodice versus this one where the skirt, the bodice points all the way down, but is still, this is one where it's fully separate. So this is an Italian style. So it has basically a little sparrow tail, and then the gowns are pleated up onto that. And just the difference in how, with the same undergarments, that sits. And I almost fell down in that picture I was turning, that's why I didn't hit my face. But, you know, and then even more so is this one where this is linen, and it has a lot more fabric folded under to kind of give the skirts more lift. And it has a very narrow, like, English pleat back that's kind of more for the slightly later part of that decade. And so exactly the same person, same undergarments, same shoes, and you get a really different silhouette depending on exactly how the gown is cut and constructed. So this is a cotton like chintz with the full English back. This is a linen dimity. It's very thin and like very soft linen. And then this one is a printed linen that is a little more sturdy and tough. And again, has much more fabric kind of folded under. So it almost has a little mini extra petticoat underneath itself. And you can see that it provides a lot more fluff. It also doesn't really fit me anymore. That neckerchief is doing a lot. I'm going to be wearing it when we come back next month, and I'm making a little kind of pseudo stomacher.
Is that an open front or a closed front?
It's supposed to be a closed front. It don't close no more. But it's an alteration you see. So I'm a historically accurate alteration. I even have, here's the best part, guys. Here's my problem. I held on to the scraps from this gown for no reason. And now I know where they are. And so I can have a matching pieced front because I'm crazy. I don't ever throw anything away. And here's the problem. Now I will never throw anything away.
It's validated, right?
It's open a closet in my house, and there's this like pile of cabbage is gonna fall on you and kill you, and that will be how I will die. So, you know.
Not what cabbage is?
Cabbage is scraps of fabric from when you're cutting. sorry. Not even literal cabbages. But yeah, so now I'll never ever get rid of any of that stuff.
Yeah,
But also, when you're looking at a historic gown and taking, doing science to it, it's very important to have kind of a wide range of tools. The main thing is that your tape measures for safety should have the little metal bits struck off. So you can literally just take like a screwdriver, or I use a Swiss Army knife, and you can kind of pry the tongs open on those little metal bits, and that way the tape measures won't accidentally catch on something on the gown while you're using them, which would be upsetting. Got my little miniature microscope in there. One tool that we used a lot today that I think was really helpful was Polaroid now makes these little printers that print a little 2x3 sticker from your phone, and it prints in 20 seconds or 30 seconds, and then you can print out the photo, slap it in your notebook, and write down why you cared about it. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I take 300 photos of something, and 3 days later I'm like, time for my notes, no clue why I cared about that. What's that picture about? Did I do that on purpose? So this way I could immediately pick out the things we were really interested in being sure we documented, slap them into a notebook, write a note, bada bang. And then someone was asking earlier about whether tools had really changed. They really haven't.
Tools for
making stuff haven't really changed. So while this is new, a lot of this stuff is new, especially the little Polaroid camera that prints off of your cell phone. The things that you actually use to make stuff and to test whether you're getting the shape right is still the same. So I've got their fountain pen, some pen nibs because I'm a hipster and I like to write with dip ink, and some nice multicolored threads and some good needles. So that is the quick answer to
And
that.
everyone, whenever I say that I've made, several of these gowns by hand, people say, oh my God, that must be so hard. And it's not especially difficult. It's time consuming.
It takes, so I keep track of the hours making a gown. To make a gown and matching petticoat, it takes roughly 100 hours by hand. It's not, it depends on how much you sew. It takes about 100 hours total of labor to do everything, and that's without fittings. So the big thing is if you're doing a lot of fittings, and depending on when you have help for that fitting, because you can't get into stuff by yourself, that it can take longer. But roughly, that's a good general rule, about 100 hours. To make a pair of stays, it's like 200,
Yeah.
250.
And in a mantua maker shop or a milliner shop or a tailor shop, there's multiple pairs of hands
Yeah.
in general. You've got the tailor, the mantua maker, the dressmaker, who is doing the fitting work, who is actually laying the fabric onto the body,
Cutting, yeah.
fitting and cutting. And then there's 3 or 4 maybe hands stitching away madly, making the actual, pieces come together. And in some tailor shops and mantua maker shops and milliner shops, there may have been enslaved workers, there may have been indentured workers, there may have been, guaranteed there were immigrant workers. I mean, the breadth of the work that was going into these gowns that, again, we don't necessarily know their names. We might know the names of a few tailors and mantua makers because they had trade cards or they had advertisements, so-and-so by the sign of the pigeon is, now informing the public that, et cetera, et cetera.
Or they self-emancipated and the person was looking for them said, hey, this person's turned into tailor and here's the clothes they took with them.
Yep.
And all the tools they stole from me and
Yeah.
yada yada. So, I mean, we do have some evidence of the kind of folks that ended up doing literally this work. But yeah, so in this case, this is just a sense of kind of what we were doing. And yeah, today.
Yeah.
Sweet. Take it away.
So, Martha Washington's painted silk gown, 1780. Now, as we know, there was at least one silk gown that passed down through Abigail's family. Martha Washington had how many silk gowns? Countless, right? So, and this particular gown, this wasn't the wedding gown. The wedding gown was the yellow.
Yellow.
Yeah. This gown shows not just in its, the material used to make it, the painted silk, which is a more time-intensive and difficult process than weaving. You can see it's got some pattern matching going on the back in that center seam. And this is that,
It's a full Italian, so.
this has that like very deep, so a lot of fabric waste happening in order to make these motifs match up. I know a lot of you were getting a look at the gown. There is very little, if any, attention paid to matching up the motifs on this gown. The front doesn't match up quite as much, but then again, the front of the gown might be covered by a handkerchief or, a cloak or whatever. You're not necessarily seeing the details of the front of the gown as much as you're seeing the back as a person, walks away. And you're seeing the volume of the skirt. You're seeing the sweep and the drama of it. But in order to make that center back match up so well, you're cutting from different parts of a bolt of fabric, which means you're making big swaths of fabric less usable. And that is a function of not really being too concerned about fabric waste. And, if you had this fancy fabric, you wanted the fabric to be usable, to be wearable, to be displayable for as long as possible, and therefore would need lots more of it in order to be able to, keep those motifs matching up. So it's a function of wealth, it's a function of, she was the first president's wife and needed to sort of put on this display. And, that's a function of the fact that there were several hundred enslaved individuals, whereas now Abigail's family, when she was a girl, there were at least 4 enslaved servants in the household that were owned by her father. And there's a darn good chance that those enslaved individuals were involved in either the refashioning or the altering or the styling of that gown. There's, it's pretty much, that gown having passed down through Abigail's family, I think that's pretty safe to say. But it's a difference of scale, right? So as Abigail married, grew up, moved into these sort of diplomatic roles and, international, politics and circles and all of that, she's definitely updating her wardrobe to reflect that. But she didn't like it. She did not revel in having to swathe herself in yards and yards of silk, and she did not think that the women in Paris were terribly modest. She was a little bit disparaging about that. So, there's this difference in kind of the application of these silk gowns, right, and what they're being used for. And you're wanting to preserve the value of the textile. The textile is where its worth is. That's literally an asset to a woman, is her clothing, her garments, her silk, her fine, muslins, whatever they are. That actually is her property. And she can determine how she wants to distribute that property, which Abigail then did in her will that she wrote in 1816. So the textile is the value. The work itself, the labor to make garments was very cheap. Preserving the value of the textile was the goal as long as you possibly could, with however many alterations and changes in went through. And we're seeing in this gown that it went through at least 2 pretty major alterations from when it was first made. Again, we don't really know exactly when or where it was woven. We don't know when it was first made into a garment. But these kind of, let's see, we are seeing sort of these creases in the garment, these folds that were part of its original structure. It has been restyled, we speculate, from the fitted, pleated back style to, it's a little hard to see here, but you can see it over there, that it comes to that major point at the back and the pieces are stitched together rather than pleated to fit the body. And we see this throughout the gown. We're seeing in the sleeves, we're seeing in the skirts, we're seeing these kind of, vestiges of its former shape, its former life. And it's a treasure to have a gown that has come down with, parts of its original structure really visible and really clearly showing, even in its, very much altered state. So we can talk a little bit more as we get over to the gown, but that's kind of the major, structural spot where you see these changes is in the back bodice. So that's pictures from today of us, peering closely at the different threads to kind of determine which threads were used at which stages of construction, counting, how many hooks had been added to the center front where it was pieced on, measuring, each piece. And again, the measurements tell us how much fabric was used. They don't necessarily tell us exactly how it was worn or over what, or, how much the person's body squished to, to get to those measurements. But that gives us, more of a kind of the creases in it, the, additional piecing that was added. We can see, even if it was altered for the same person, it's been added to and changed and reconfigured, but it is still very much recognizable as a gown. Did you want to talk a little bit more about these processes?
Yeah, so like I said, you see our tape numbers there. And so for these for these sections, because the gown's age, we don't want to do what you would call a rub off, which sounds more fun than it is. But so what you would do with a modern garment that you're trying to reproduce is you might put either a piece of organza or a piece of parchment over the gown, and then you can kind of trace the pattern pieces off. And that works fine, but for the age of this gown, we didn't want to do that just for fear of accident. So there were just literally, we laid out a grid, we kind of make an artificial grid on the gown piece per section using a tape measure crosswise along the grain, and then we go through and like map it out, kind of like you sunk my battleship, but for fabric. And the other thing we did, as you see we're doing in the bottom left, is we're literally using these microscopes to try to find individual threads, usually from the sewing construction, to check what is the fiber. And you can make yourself a little insane about that, but I think we kept it together today. The big thing is that when you magnify linen to the extent that this is, which is about 250 times, it looks like little tiny pieces of bamboo, and they're very shiny and pretty. Silk has a more like smooth appearance, and it's very, very shiny. And then cotton looks kind of fluffy under the microscope. And it does still have, sometimes you can see individual fibers, and you'll see like it almost looks like a ribbon, but it doesn't have the little bamboo like striations that you see in linen. And so that's one of the ways you can tell the difference is among those three fabrics. We didn't find any wool, we didn't find any nylon or super modern materials.
Except for the lace.
Except for the lace, yeah. So you do sometimes see, especially if something has been just conserved as opposed to mended in situ in the original time frame, that's one of the ways that you'll sometimes find. For example, there's versions of silk that weren't really readily reproducible before the 20th century, and those look different. So again, it's sort of like just a matter of looking really carefully, and for me the biggest thing is not letting my own assumption about what I'm going to see take away my observation. So by background, I'm a molecular biologist, and that I think helped us a lot today, because I was like, no, we need to actually look at it. And I think it's cotton. I was like, no, think, look, no, think. What do you observe? Yeah, so that's fun. But yeah, no, it was legitimately really amazing. And so, for example, one place where you can see probable alteration is in the center front pieces. There are sewn on hooks. It's not technically hook and loop tape. There's a piece of cotton tape that has been used to finish that edge, and then someone went by hand and sewed on these hooks. This kind of hook is producible in the 18th century, but you don't see it a lot. It's really 19th century style, and it's probably machine made. So, and they're probably what's called Japan. So they've basically been enameled, which makes them very rust-proof, which is good for us because the dress doesn't have big rust marks on it. So someone, whoever did that, had access to it at the time when the finest materials available to make that alteration. So that's good. And but the other cool thing about it is we had been debating and looking at photos and talking about, was this a full center closed front gown? So it could be. It would be pretty small if it was a full center closed, but there isn't a surviving, any further piece that would close that, and so we weren't really sure. And then today we realized as we're standing there that there's hooks on both sides.
It's not hooks and eyes.
There's no slot B for the tab A. And so we're like, okay, well that does suggest that there must be a stomacher, or there was also a period in the 19th century where people would have a waistcoat that would have little eyelets in it for you to hook your gown closed over. So it basically functions as a stomacher, but it's just got a different construction. So if that was the reason they did that alteration, that would be why, but that other piece of the garment doesn't survive. at least not in association with this. For all we know, it's floating around in someone's attic. You know, grandma had this cool waistcoat, you know, yeah.
But yeah, there was this fad in, 1870s and bicentennial to refashion these 18th century gowns and kind of parade them, and, so it's consistent with lots of other examples that we've seen. So this is Abigail done in, why does that say 800? 1800/1815.
All the types of hair.
And this is from the National Gallery of Art. And this gown, which Sandy will recognize, Sandy was there with me when I got to examine this gown. Basically, on a whim.
100%
This was like, we were visiting the Peace Field, the Adams National Historic Park, and Sandy just came out and asked one of the rangers, is there a gown that you guys have? Like, can we see it? And they were like, well, not today. Not today, but come back on the 4th, I think it was. And we can get it out for you.
Okay.
So we got to actually paw through, all of the different construction details of this gown.
Carefully examined scientifically. Yes. And drool.
They gave us access to the gown. And I have pictures. They even held up the mannequin that they had used to display it next to me. Oh, yeah, this could work.
How does this size-wise compare to that?
I have the document where they showed the measurements. I haven't added it to this slide, but I have it. That would be very interesting to see the comparison of sizes. And of course, this is that, we're fully into
It's
it's a different gown, different undergarments, different, different structure. But it is, presumably worn by the same woman.
Don't feel bad about my hand stitching anymore.
No,
It's considered
Nothing,
very good on a dress.
yes, nothing makes
You
you
know
feel
what?
more confident than seeing how.
I'm like, oh, she got a big one, a little one, a big one.
Yeah, no. Seeing the lack of consistency and historic
so much
dresses
better.
makes you feel so much better. There's never the same number of pleats on the right and left side. The stitches just wildly change in their
How much your
size.
wrist hurts,
The tension tends to be pretty good.
Yeah.
But they've also, just like historic knitting, all the tension in that stitching has had time to even itself out. So sometimes things look better than they even did when they were made.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like this, time was of the essence to get garments made. You got paid when it was finished, right? So, yeah, the stitchers in a tailor shop or mantua maker shop are working their little butts off. As fast as they can. And it is rough, yeah. The insides of these gowns, stitching is not, by any stretch of the imagination, perfect.
Because also remember, these gowns are also benefiting from the high quality and strength of the stays and other undergarments. So those were more carefully made and therefore more expensive.
Yep.
But the gown didn't need to hold back anyone's fleshly protuberances. So a modern gown of that similar shape is expected to do more for the body than this gown was. This gown needs to hang together well enough to not completely fall off of you.
This fabric is extremely fine. I mean, like, it was like,
Like tissue.
I mean, it's a satin, but it's not a satin like any satin I've ever seen modernly. Like,
They can't reproduce.
they can't, yeah, I mean, we literally don't have the means to make fabrics the way they used to. Like, the fineness, the tightness of the weave, as you were talking about, the linen. I mean, linen was hard wearing, linen was strong, linen could withstand constant washing, and, you wore it under everything so you didn't care how much it wrinkled. And now we kill ourselves to, make sure that the iron, we iron all of those wrinkles out of linen when wrinkles are a feature, not a bug. Like, wrinkles in linen help, wick the moisture away. So it's, we've kind of switched how we think about linen when it used to be the fabric of the people, and now, fancy, like, tailored linen suits and linen skirts and they look terrible when they get all wrinkled, because that's what linen does, So it's like the concept of throwing your linen in the wash and just letting it, get sudsed up and then throwing it in the dryer. Linen is supposed to stand up to that. Does it now?
Some do, not the next.
Right. So what we're thinking about when recreating a gown, again, the materials. How close can you get to a historical textile? It really depends. What taffeta nowadays, pretty solid choice for replicating a historical garment. But just about every other weave, every other fiber are treated differently now. Animals are different breeds that we just don't have the same structure. We don't have the same means of creating textiles in the same way. You can get close. You can get pretty darn close sometimes. When a gown has been altered, or a garment has been altered, do you recreate it in its current state? Do you recreate something of a previous state? What undergarments are you planning to wear with it? What millinery are you planning to add to it? And again, those techniques, we can get pretty darn close to historical construction techniques, but milliners, mantua makers, tailors, they kept their techniques private, secret, a lot of them, because they didn't want the competition to be able to say, look how well I can make my garment by, imitating what, It was a skilled trade. It was a very closely guarded, practice. And not a lot of them wrote down everything in books because they wanted to be able to say that their methods were the best. So we have a lot of, tradition and oral, sharing of these techniques, but not a lot of clear, this is what you do first, this is what you do next, and this is how you make sure that it's, And then is it going to be displayed? Is it going to be worn? That might change, your considerations in actually then making that garment. Do you want to talk about the whys?
Okay, so back to the why. So
Why the heck
what are we doing with the why? So again, images can only tell you so much. Images are also produced, kept, displayed, used even in the original time with agendas. And so what the fabric can tell us more about is a little more real, a little more personal than what an image can do. Sometimes when you're working with historic and antique garments, you'll open something up and you'll get this little waft of that original wearer's personal space. Which you don't get any other way. And then it also connects you to the makers of the past. It creates and maintains an unbroken relationship with our ancestors. Again, it shows how a different garment will sit differently in different bodies. I have some friends who have similar measurements to mine. We can trade gowns around a little bit. We have to pin them a little differently. We have to style them a little differently because we're not exactly the same. I do have a literal twin sister who does wear my clothes, but that's not, a common situation. And it does change how you move around, and you get to where you actually forget, oh, I can get past that person in that doorway because I don't have. I'm always telling myself, get out of my way. And he's like, I'm not in your way. And I'm like, you're in the way of the imaginary gown I'm wearing. Back up. I'm not going to wrinkle this thing, So, but it gives you a better sense of, moving, how people were doing things in their own body, and it makes some things make more sense. So, for example, one of my favorite things to point out is we have all these implicit understandings of how people are and what they do in the world and how they even look. And so you're reading like a Victorian Galsworthy novel about, you know, a family going through a crisis of inheritance. And then he'll very casually throw out there about a kind of side character. He had the arms and shoulders of a surgeon. And to modern people, it doesn't make any, so you think, what does that mean? Well, this is before they had any kind of anesthesia. So surgeons were fast and they were strong. They looked like butchers, and because they basically were. And so to the mind of people who were contemporarily reading that brought to mind, if they're picturing The Rock. You know, and like we have to think about it for a minute. And similarly, when you've worn these kinds of garments, you've moved in them, you've played in them, you've done dishes in them, you've chased after 3-year-olds in them. You know, you've run after your friend because you have her car keys in your pocket, and you gotta just, dig deep. You're wearing heels and a wig, it just gives you a little more of a connection to kind of why things are the way they are. I think we can gain insights from making and wearing things that we can't get any other way. It's just through experiencing them the best we can.
And we noticed we took measurements of every piece of that gown, and the arm side, the opening for the arm and shoulder on the right, what was it, 21
inches.
21 inches on the right and 19 and a half on the left.
Which is a pretty common asymmetry.
Someone's right-handed.
But they're right-handed, basically.
So, a little bit more muscle mass on your dominant arm, and those are the things that, we think about clothing. The assumption is you can just cut out one side of a shirt the same as the other. Symmetrical, great. But people's bodies are not symmetrical, and so it takes looking at these measurements and going, oh, of course they didn't cut out 2 sleeves mirrored exactly. They cut out the sleeve that fit on this side, and then they cut out the sleeve that fit on this side. They're literally there with the person standing in front of them, draping fabric over the shoulder and arm that is in front of them. And that's,
And that leads back to social history, though. So
Yep.
interestingly, speaking of, the fun topic of enslavement, one of the interesting things about that is that when you look at the way people managed the fabric and clothes that they were required by law to provide to their enslaved individuals, because there was apparently a barn that was in hell, but they were required to give them a certain number of clothes and a certain number of things per year, but then they would explicitly, part of the inhumanity and the attempt to take away individuality from these people was to have their clothes not fit them properly. So they would do sizes like small, medium, large, or women's and men's. And there's actually some great examples where the talented seamstress who was enslaved in the community, was given the job of, making the clothes for everyone for that season. And she cut everything too nicely, and the person in charge made her tear it up and start over because it was too fashionable. He didn't want his people, what he saw as his people, walking around in these wastefully cut clothes. He wanted big square cuts. And so, even having that distinction shows you it's a garment that is being beautifully made and fashioned for someone with privilege. And someone who gets exactly what works for them. And part of it, when you look at movies and TV shows, yes, actors they're part of their job of being attractive and they're good looking at their jeans and whatnot, but their clothes fit them really well. So even if a TV show or movie is using off-the-rack clothing, they take those things from Target, they go to the costume department and they get them tailored even more so that they really fit that person and they look better than regular people. And one of the ways that we express our humanness and our ability and our work is by having things that fit us nicely.
Yeah. And the secondhand market for clothing, like you couldn't go to just a store and buy a gown, but you might go to the rag picker, you might go, to the stall that had, gowns or breeches or coats or whatever. You would then either do it yourself or have someone tailor that to you. So stolen clothes or secondhand clothes, there was still this concept that it should fit you as well as it can, even though it wasn't made for you. So the personalization, that we think now of like, ooh, getting a couture piece, a bespoke piece is this fancy thing. Pretty much everything, with the exception of clothing for the enslaved, was made for your unique body. So when you're studying a gown like this, you're getting that wearer's, that wearer's dimensions in
At least in their
finished-
undergarments,
Yeah, in undergarments, yeah. So, taking a pattern, like we have all these books now of just gowns that have been drawn out and, all of the different pieces of them, laid out so you can draft them for remaking, but you're getting that person's size and shape. You're getting that person's dimensions. So there should be some, alteration happening when you make a mock-up, you drape it and see, okay, where do I need to make these changes so that it fits my body and my dimensions.
Well, and I think the important element with that is that there's an element to which clothes fit you, plus you're not the other way around. So it's nothing wrong with you, it's the cut being correct for you. And I think it's sad that we kind of lost that, to be honest. So
That's, on that cheerful
what we
note.
got.
Oh, wait, we didn't. Oh, we didn't do your QR code, it's just mine. Okay.
No, there's Lisa's QR code.
This is very confusing.
My email
So
address.
it's my QR code and Sarah's email address. Because we exhausted ourselves today working on this one. At one point, Sarah was like, "Do you want an athlete?" And I said, "No."
Are we measuring this?
She's like,
It's time for lunch.
and I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's probably." If Lisa said no, that I'll just eyeball it. And you were like, "That's not you. We're not doing that."
That's not the Lisa I know.
It's like, "Oh
I
no."
just have a really stupid joke now because you're talking about how it used to be the norm to like fit to everything, and I was like, so the furries were right all along. Because when you were buying a fursuit,
They have
as one, you do the body double, you make it fitted to the person with the additions, and downside, you're wearing a custom rug and it's 9 degrees in there, but yeah. They're carrying on.
linen.
They're carrying on the tradition.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly, so.
So yeah, if anyone has other questions, we can, gather back around the gown, whatever you like. Please, yeah.
How has this dress been preserved, and do you see the colors as true?
Somewhat, yes. There was some conservation done to it, just to repair like some, like weak spots and everything. There is actually, and I have now studied this gown 3 times, and today I discovered there was this flap of extra fabric inside the sleeve seam.
It's
Never saw before.
And it looks like it's in perfect condition.
And it's bright and vibrant. I mean, the colors are very vibrant, and silk is not typically a fiber where the dyes are fugitive. Like linen has a harder time holding on to dye. Wool is amazing. Cotton's pretty good. Linen, but silk holds on to dye.
And this is before they were putting in all the crazy artists.
Yeah, there's no, like, aniline and all that,
There's nothing
yeah.
in there that's eating the silk.
So, the colors are pretty bright, but this little flap that's inside the sleeve is
Even
like
brighter. Yeah, it looks
brand
pretty.
new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it comparable? I mean, is
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
I have a sofa that's faded more than that thing.
What will happen to the new dress you make?
So the new dress is gonna go on display
Where?
here.
Oh, we'll stay here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've debated back and forth, like, do we fully recreate the gown in its most, current iteration, do we, to speculate back, like, what was it originally? Hard to say. But, in line with the 250th, with when it's pretty likely Abigail, was aware that the dress was in her family. We're probably going to recreate 1770s in the textile that is being recreated.
So the fabric was probably, at least the fabric's fashionability would have been highest in the early 1730s.
Yeah.
So going to 1770 is pretty conservative. It would have been available, and people did do that. People did hang on to fabric that hadn't been made up yet or remade it. You could also have originally had it. There's a 1730 style that's extremely streamlined and has almost no cuts in it that you could quite readily recut.
There's a I think it's either 1790s or early 1800s bright red brocade gown, high-waisted, column skirt, the whole thing in this heavy, diaphanous, the least diaphanous fabric you can think of, but it was preserved through,
Continual use.
you're like that shape and that gown and that textile
Doesn't make sense.
doesn't make any sense, but again, preserving the value of a gown, preserving the value of the textile, and continuing to, if that's your best, that's your best. That's what you got. So, it's always interesting to see where a gown kind of freezes. Like, this gown has been frozen in, sort of that 1870s.
Yeah.
The red, high-waisted, sort of Regency-esque gown got frozen in time there, because at that point there's very little fabric left to do anything with. As waists get higher and skirts get narrower, you can't really go big again after that.
Which is why you see so many 1860s gowns are just the bodice now, because the skirt was big enough to just make something else out of.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of 1860s, just the bodice.
Okay.
Because the skirt used so much fabric that was kept in big panels.
One of Martha's dresses got made into couch cushions, right?
Yeah, or chair covers.
And things are cut up for relics.
Well, that too. Yes.
They end up in a frame,
Yeah.
they end up in the lining of a purse, they end up in the lining of a jewelry box.
Their needle cases.
Needle cases.
Well, and one of Abigail's bequests in her will was half my silk lutestring gown to this niece and half of it to this granddaughter. The fabric was the point. It was, I'm giving you enough fabric to have a gown made out of half a gown.
Very special.
Yeah.
Because it was 1816 when she was writing the will, so, maybe there was a gown that had been sort of this voluminous shape, that then there was enough in that single gown to divide into two.
And what's with the metal hook? And why not, buttons were too expensive, and when's buttons gonna be?
The problem with buttons for this kind of gown, if you're reusing it in the 19th century,
It's fixed. It's in a specific
it's
spot.
not just that, but
The
you
button.
have to cut into the fabric to make the button
Yeah.
hole.
Yeah.
And this fabric, even though it is very stable compared to a modern brocade, it's still pretty lively. So anything that you do that cuts threads in that thing, they're gonna start having a party, shaking hands, running around, and you won't be able to stop it. It's a mess. So you could, if you were really dedicated to buttons, you could do a bound buttonhole or some other kind of buttonhole.
There are
But
some
for the 19th
groups.
century,
Yeah.
there weren't, those techniques didn't really exist yet. For modern, I can think of how you would do it, but they didn't have some of the materials I would use to make that possible, to keep
And
it
it
from just
wasn't in
falling
style.
apart. Huh?
18th century, it just wasn't in style.
Well, and the-
Riding habit or
so
something.
Riding habit or a compare front.
So for the 19th century,
That's it, yeah.
the reason you would do the hook is also because it was honestly the preferred way. A lot of the gowns, when you look at them from the 19th century that look like they have a row of buttons, they're just attached on there, but then the real closure is hooks. and usually into an eyelet.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in the
Just what they
18th
prefer to do.
century,
If you're getting a real tight fit, they have to do, when you button something with a button, you have to be able to overlap it enough to get it over the button. But if you're doing a bodice and you want it to be what they used to call it like wallpaper, you want it in there, you don't have enough give in that fabric to move it over the button. So if you can get it all in there, and then you're done. It's great. But if you need enough ease and comfort to move it and stretch to move it and get a button through a buttonhole, you can't do that if you also want that garment to fit. You just can't do it.
but yeah, so in the 18th century, like riding habits and the like false button front stomachers that aren't doing any like heavy lifting, it's strictly decorative.
They're just pretty.
The riding habit you might see on the waistcoat of the riding habit, but then sometimes a lot of the buttonholes and buttons on riding habits were just decorative. You'd work the buttonhole and then not even cut it open.
Yeah. Well, those are wool though.
It's wool, right.
Wool doesn't be.
So, but yeah, like this fabric, the selvages are, I mean, they're not going anywhere. But yeah, anywhere where they've cut into the weave, it's, it's prone to fraying.
It's fragile.
Which is the other piece of that whole thing about wastage, right? If you're cutting little bits and bobs out of a large swath of fabric to match up your, patterns, you're leaving cut edges, and then it'll just, you'll lose the value of the fabric with all of the fraying and loosening of fibers and all of that. So it's not just about, we don't care about, the patterns matching, we care about the integrity of the fabric also.
Yeah, so for historically produced, it's not as bad, but modern brocades and even one, like basically it's machine woven, once you cut that live end, you can almost hear it sizzling as it's trying to like get away from itself. And it's just a huge pain. So I don't know how much they were worried about that specifically, but again, if the goal is to get a really tight fit, the best way to do it is with hooks.
Yeah.
Who's reproducing the fabric?
It's a mill in India. So not reconstructing, Renaissance Fabrics, Diana. I had reached out to her about potentially like supporting the project in some way, and she was like, do you have the fabric arranged yet? Because I work with several mills in India for my shop. Would you like me to, see if they can reproduce this? And they are.
How many yards?
Well, they're gonna do a full like retail run, and then she's gonna have that in her shop to sell. Yes.
We don't know how much she's gonna charge for it.
A lot.
A lot.
Well, if she can get it, she can have it.
Worth it.
Worth it.
Worth it.
How many yards are you gonna order for the project?
I think probably like 7 to 10, just because,
How wide is it?
well, and it's not as narrow as these
You're
ones.
doing 45 with?
Yeah. It'll be like,
It's mechanically loom. It's
Yeah.
mechanically produced, so
Yeah.
it won't be 16 inches.
it will not be 16 inches wide. So yeah, and the question then is, we're not getting, fabric that is the historically accurate width. Do you then put in like little false seams to replicate the panel width of your?
We will, don't worry.
How much torture are you willing to do?
We're not gonna cut it.
I say this to myself as I'm doing.
What I'm not doing is
short
hand
stitches.
binding every one of those seams. We're not doing.
No. But yeah, like again, cutting, even though yes, historically the width is gonna be 16 inches, cutting that up compromises,
Yeah,
the weave, so it's like, I think a false seam, yeah.
false seam. No one can tell.
Because then you want to have your pattern matching if you have all seam too. Which
They
is
didn't care.
That's my
They don't
point.
care about pattern matching.
That's my point.
Yeah.
If you leave it full,
Yeah,
it's a
It would look,
matched
it
pattern.
doesn't look the same, yeah.
So adding the false seam will, and
it creates like, the little
Yeah,
gutter
It
kind of
creates
thing.
that little jog, yeah, and so that gives the eye that rest, yeah. So,
Yeah.
any other questions, thoughts?
You mentioned the lace on the sleeves. I think we can
So
ask-
the lace is we're pretty sure that that's that later, like 19th century edition. There were lace tuckers and sleeve, like ruffles that were made of like either a very lightweight gauze, like linen, cotton, or it could be lace. But that's a style of lace that's definitely later than the 18th century original. Yeah.
Have you tried making your own lace?
No.
Okay, I just want to know how hard it is, because it's not like I'm trying to get into it, I'm already doing embroidery. I'm just like very curious to know.
All those little.
I own some handmade lace, I'm not gonna make it. There's
Well,
a limit.
and when it's like mounted, I don't want to put a handkerchief on it to cover up the details, but we might do a little like neck tucker or something.
Do a little tucker. The tucker doesn't hide as much.
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions? You just want to go stare at it some more? Your curator then. So it's going to be fragile, be wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, this is my friend Catherine.
A display replica.
I mean, she was making that for a very specific event. I don't remember what it was. She was making that
So
for
it's really,
but she also, unfortunately, they got burned up in a fire. I don't think it happened, like, not that much. But, you know the movie, she recreated making dresses from that? I know, I'm so excited about that.
And that was, 22. History of it was, but it wasn't until, we got some passes sort of first.
Yeah, it's the back. And so, the other thing is, when you look at the size, is that
There's a mounted deer feel by us. But it's got like very similar shapes. Except those houses are
There was no my farm job hasn't consumed me.
she's only on our website, like our media.
Here you go. That's a really precious one now.
Yeah, I actually saw this last minute yesterday on the Hazel Forum on 1 page. And I said to my boyfriend, I said, oh, I gotta leave the house tomorrow. I gotta leave the house after 5. I'm like, yeah, make talk about historical dresses. And, and I was like, oh, I gotta go see the dress. And now I'm communicating these things to my friend Catherine. Who makes her, yeah, she did a replica of one of the dresses. Crimson Peak. Unfortunately, her apartment caught fire. And I'm so upset. But then this they made that one too. Big fan of this dress. She makes the best. She's a bit like Sarah. When I saw her, I was like, are they lit? She makes amazing stuff. But she's like, I hate the way modern clothes fits me, so I'm not wearing modern clothes.
So also,
Dress she made for the dolls in the war. Did survive the fire.
male styles in their wedding habits, but they would go to a male they wouldn't go to a female dress. So there was a very gender division of the period that actually this style, the gown that this was big when this fabric was probably produced, was the first gown which had women makers making formal clothes for others for pay versus at home making her house dress and her family's linen and stuff. That was always a thing, right? But for gowns that were outside of the home, up until the 1730s, that was the man, and he would make your dress for you. But then, when she started this style of gown, really fashionable, that was very, very big.
I've seen most of that.
Yeah.
Pieces of fabric that you're then draping onto the person, in order to do that properly,
all of the
the person has to be in your underwear. And so the argument was that that's not appropriate until
We're gonna make
there's a bunch of books about these lectures male Taylor is going to see your life in your underwear. And so this is the first time we started getting given doing this work for pay and being able to wrestle part of that industry away from male tailors was for this style.
I said,
I made one like this.
Show the seams on the skirt of your shirt on the seam or something, but that's like
It's sort of like
everything else is canvas.
so much of how we're wearing it is on
I mean, I didn't have to buy it, I went and found
as opposed to
material that.
it's a formed thing, right? So it looks like this when it's laid out,
Wasn't bad.
and then you have to tuck and manipulate it to get it to look right on the body. And so you need a ladies' maid to help you.
There's no fix of that about the way clothes fit me nowadays.
Yeah.
How much work it always seems to go
It
into
was a
it.
lot of work, and if people in these kinds of things have the money and time to put the work in. You know, the regular work people for this
She's
year,
a lot younger
you
than
didn't
she
have
should be. I mean,
access.
I had her late, but.
You didn't have someone to help you get into all your craft work.
I still have it.
So you don't like get any boils on the dress or anything? I
It's
saw it and I was like surprised not to giggle, but at the same time.
This is partly but this is partly because if I'm taking a photo of a very specific his fingers are smaller than mine, so I can go, I want to look at
Such a great idea.
My big fat finger, it's which thing am I pointing at? Where I can have him go, okay, his forefinger is
They
going
used
to
to be
take
that
that thing.
skinny.
Yeah, exactly. So like my fingers are
That's a great idea.
so he's not gonna.
Yeah, that's fantastic, actually.
Plus my audience for some reason goes effing crazy.
I almost just did too.
I'll do like, I'll be, you know, 'cause I'm building myself in my phone, right? And I'll be like, well, over here, and then we need this thing over here. For some reason, people just say it's one thing.
That's
I
fantastic.
love my little skills for you.
I do mostly hand embroidery, so I've been working on a picture of Moby Dick jumping over a ship, and that's all by hand.
So
those
one of
little
the things we're
stitches.
gonna do as part of this exhibit is
That's also little stitches.
He's also unique.
Yeah, so it was, I got most of the boat done at home.
They
Oh,
for us, and he helps me calibrate.
When I'm going crazy, I sit down and I stab it with a pad, you know. It's funny that when they're talking about the linen, this linen versus the linen stitches. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because I like to draw. Oh, it's the store that sells like skulls and stuff. And I said it, and I actually painted that for him, yeah, because he sells weird things like skulls. But no, I do shading, so I'm not that.
Okay, yeah, okay, so she would teach you, beginner?
Yeah.
She teaches you how to do, she's gonna do that. She teaches you how to draw.
She might, I mean, she's going back down to.
Yeah, this is the one I think that would benefit from charcoal. I had to censor because it's
So having the thoughts, as I'm listening,
She would show you the
there's a microscope upstairs in the education closet. They have unfinished drawings.
I mean,
None of them are work class. I tried to do them all the time.
I need some more stuff to do. I mean, not like I need any more hobbies,
So it was
but
my first class. She taught us.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's worth it.
I like the idea of having the microscope.
before that,
slightly bigger form.
They're not like expensive.
We have upstairs in the education.
And then I have a friend of mine down in Salem who sells some of my stuff for me every once in a while.
Tall shelves.
Somebody from the store down there.
How long is it? 3, 4 feet? 2 feet?
Some of the.
Lord, do you have a piece of picture?
No, you can import things. This is how much I'm gonna look at. No, you actually don't have to, and then this is. Pictures. Right, you mentioned this is Then I have a leopard gecko who just stared at me like.
That would be fun to add to.
And then
Import them, they're actually like captive breds here in the US. That would be cool. So we don't put them together because he'd eat the leopard gecko. He's a bit carnivorous. But this is him with the sweet.
I have them in drive.
Chicken and green beans. His favorite is beef. So I make him beef and spinach.
He's a tiny little boy. Still growing?
and then.
He's basically done so the genetics of people help me.
Yeah, we
And
think
so
it's
that other than here in the US, we can.
That and also alignment.
CH Silverhanes Pantera.
And we can turn it again to, we can turn it again to Chevy and say.
Sorry to keep you
So
from all
this,
the editing.
we see, this is like that Italian shop, with the gown, you know, make it in like this Rover style.
She's got these details, yeah. She feels so nice.
There's no, is it a round gown or is it like, you know, petticoat and open, like, does petticoat get chopped up or?
Yeah, most times I see it, sort of.
The big
Each version of it. You want to make 3 different versions of the gown?
I think I will. If she's doing a run, I'm not sure you're able to stop me.
No, I mean, she's doing like a full retail run.
I know she is, that's why I have that opportunity.
So we should buy some more fabric.
Lisa, you want to get a picture of us with the gown?
Yeah, so the plan, we'll have the exhibit
Sandy, can you take a picture of
will be right over here for the. This one isn't gonna come back out.
So you can see the gown and
But it's
us.
not gonna be on display.
It's under.
I'm gonna move.
So it's just too fragile to be like this.
And move the chair and the
Yeah. So we may again
It's
sometimes.
Massachusetts, there's
I know, over, give people another opportunity.
Duncan is like, you know,
Not like that's the whole thing, right?
Duncan runs through your veins.
Bring on the plans, it'll be on the landing, right?
Make a Dunkin'
Before you
line.
Ready?
Oh, I'm sorry, you enjoy it.
That's one of those terrible funny ideas I may indulge.
I know. Yeah.
Very funny. Massachusetts, what dress are you making for Massachusetts? A Dunkin' Donuts themed gown based on because he was from Massachusetts, he was in Massachusetts.
Thinking about it, I have
Went
a
to any excuse for me to wear my medieval age stuff, I'm just like, it's comfy.
Yeah, but where do they have? Where can you wear that? I mean, are
All
there-
around the house, honestly, all around. I usually King Richard's is still going on.
Yeah.
I mean, then sometimes when I go to visit my friends in Salem, I just wear that. It's
Well,
fun.
there should be one thing.
What do you want different about this picture? What did you fix it to you?
If I would expand
With
it,
the gown?
make it
Yeah, there's another one now that's many covered weekends in New Hampshire. It's not the Kingston one, but there is a newer one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a newer one. And then, obviously another Connecticut around there is like the best. I don't remember because I've never gotten a chance to go. It's always like one of the works, you know,
Try that.
I work here at Hazel and Hazel, so I work at Hazel High.
Yeah.
It always happens during the school.
Here?
year. And I- oopsies.
Well, there you don't have the lights behind you, which is. So that's
Let's just talk about that.
Oh, and, yeah,
That's beautiful.
I like that better because of the,
Yeah, it gets Dunkin' Donuts.
I
It's not like Starbucks in the game of Thrones.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I don't better than I do.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
I don't have enough there.
But Carrie said she's doing a workshop here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I meant to email her today.
I got a little bit more of it done, but I did
She's
know
on
I.
early things.
So she was packing.
Yes,
That's
here.
all. Very fun.
When I was younger, that's the
Yeah.
problem. When I was younger, people who were older would say, yes, well, I can't begin cooking. Turn over.
I'm learning while I can. Yeah, I'm learning while I can.
Easy to see or
Yes, I can,
You want to see
do
easy to see?
I want to see it.
the buyer's
but it's been like,
She did it from.
you know, back together on the same seam lines.
How beautiful, yeah.
Just, you know,
We've now added to, take so.
this is later, I mean, yeah, and they're knife plated, we're not up in
Every
water.
holiday, and that's my.
And there's
boyfriend's job. I'm
creases,
just like,
there's,
if I
you
had
know,
to see like Christmas,
there's
it's over,
pleats.
it's like,
Do they have one
and
in
then all the
sleeves? How many?
it's like,
Yeah, oh, hey Lisa, we forgot to write down how big the creases are in the skirt,
I don't even know.
Oh, good thing you said something before you left.
Like, look right here.
Oh, this was very fun.
That had to have been a knife plate, right?
And what's a knife plate? You put like a knife in and then what was it called? Like just-
It's because they're like, you're
But that's
putting the
bigger.
fabric like over itself
Yeah.
rather than, because gathering,
Yeah, it's called a knife plate. It could be, it's just like why you want a knife plate.
I don't know. I don't know why knife pleats are called that instead of,
Yeah.
because cartridge pleating
So that
is gathering up,
Yeah.
and knife pleats are like flat front and flat in the back. It's still pulling in the volume, it's just kind of between that. Nothing doing it.
I don't see any.
No.
Well, but, okay, so you need to look at the original. So this is the piecing. So you need to look at the original, but they might have,
But that's too far.
yeah, it's too far down.
But this could be storage.
It could be storage. Yeah, that's storage.
So if,
They added the length at the top in the weirdest way possible.
So this is your pieced part though.
They added selvage
This
sections,
might, oh, you know what? This might be from when they took the bodice apart.
or it could be from when they took the original petticoat
Or the
apart.
petticoat, or if it was ever a.
Because they have selvage to selvage sections, but they cut them
It's so weird, it's this crazy
in
jigsaw.
random heights.
It's this crazy jigsaw, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just,
They put the selvages above, they put the selvage to selvage pieces above the skirt panels and then stitched along the selvage to make, you know, skirts together. But these, like, this one, this one's here, this one's here.
Just like TV on there?
What?
Yeah. That's all I'm trying to do is-
I'm gonna draw now, but I think.
Something else must have happened in the day.
It's like-
It's like, oh,
Originally, it was set up for being more over a big
We
side.
can do it with the iPad.
You would have more length on this side than the back, and that was why it's gonna have this crazy jigsaw.
It's
That's
a
the problem, yeah, that is closed.
Boo.
So-
No, I know you'd have outside pockets and stuff.
You need more length in the sides than the back when you have hoops on, and that's why.
I know, I've seen them now.
Here, because they wanted to be able to have
Go to an SEA
the
event, yeah.
70s bustle.
But then they added this extra length and then it dragged in the mud. So they had to add
And
this
then they had to
like
fix
glazed
it.
cotton.
Who wore it, right?
Right.
I've never actually seen
But
it.
if they added length and then it doesn't have padding or a bustle, it's too long.
I know.
That's what lines most.
This is, yeah, bodices,
This is
right?
well, bodices, but you also see it in. you
In a
also
skirt,
see it
and it's also
in
right along the skirt,
The
yeah.
whole skirt is lined that way.
But the glazed cotton is like, it's definitely not.
Oh, no, definitely not.
Base cotton is.
What are you doing?
It's ubiquitous.
But yeah, so the pockets were not on the selvage.
I know, that's insane.
I know.
And I have it on HDMI.
But they unpicked the pocket
It's
slit.
gonna work before.
Well, you get that little quarter inch of seam allowance, they unpicked that,
Because.
and
You need
sewed
it,
it
you
back
need it.
together, just to get that little half inch total.
Extra bit.
So just get that little bit.
You need it.
So it's not a sloppy alteration, it's intentional.
So the pocket slits, I think, were, yeah, they were originally pinned, right? They would have finished the edges.
That's really
So then they unpicked that.
So
It's like- It's not sloppy. They weren't worried about it, it shows it's not worried.
Yeah, it's not.
If they put in, where's the extra flap of?
Oh, the extra flap of sleeve.
Extra flap of sleeve. That's the weirdest part, that's the part I'm having trouble understanding, because they added a wedge to the sleeve in place, it's really common to add wedge. It's a big old chunk. The pink is
It's like the red ribbon is a lot
They
brighter.
added a triangle to the sleeve, which is a really common thing to add, usually maybe as you age.
This is, okay, so
might get a better view.
Or as a youngster.
She might get a better view on this
But
side.
then there's this weird dot on the inside, and I don't know why they would do that.
And this one,
I've done that on
Which one did they piece?
I've done wedges like that.
No, it's piece in, but there's also piece in,
But
seam.
why then tuck in extra like in there? It doesn't make any
Why can't
sense.
we see it now?
But it's good for us.
Can you point out the
Yes.
piece that's in the sleeve again?
Where's the piece?
It's under that.
I can't see the
So what
piecing
we're
on the
looking at
sleeve
is
wedge
the
anymore.
color difference.
I think you might be just going a little cross-eyed end of the day.
Here's your piece. It's right there. This is
No,
what.
no, this one.
Here's that.
That's what,
Here's the right side.
Yes, yeah. That is just random little chunks put together to make one sleeve.
See?
Precisely.
because again, 20 pounds.
It's on the Abigail gown too. There's extra like wedges added in the sleeves.
Yep, and now I need to.
The other Abigail gown. This is the Abigail gown. The satin brown, whatever.
The piece field.
The piece field gown. Yes.
Well, you know how it started. The tour guide, the ranger says, and there's a gown in here. Remember the chest in the hallway?
Yeah.
And there's a brown gown in here, and you're like, that's the porch. And I'm like, can we see it?
Just like, but
Because he said it in
that's right.
the chest. in the
Yes.
hallway.
How did we even get on that topic though?
He just.
Was it during the tour?
Oh, yeah, and he was
Is
like,
it still
oh,
in
I know
there?
where they're here.
Yeah, we asked if it was still in the chest, and they're like, no, it's over in the archive. And then you said, well, can we see it?
Meanwhile, this color's gorgeous too.
I like that green. That's like one of my, it's like my favorite.
Great style, your glasses.
I gotta say on that Martha Washington dress, absolutely obsessed with the teeny snail.
I know, the little
It's all
insects.
bugs, like stag beetles, the
Yes.
snail. Took a picture of it mostly for the little
There was an
snail.
article that she sent me,
It looks so cool.
no, Alexis Cover, about how it shows she was a naturalist.
Martha Washington was?
Well, that's what Alexis
Being
Cover.
a casual naturalist is one of those.
Huh?
Fashionable, you know.
Yes, that's what I was eventually going for.
Not,
words are
not so
hard.
you can use with a naturist, that's a different thing.
That's Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Franklin like his nature everywhere.
If we could bring Ben Franklin back, he would have a great time on Martha's Vineyard at Gay Head on the beach there. Because I remember going there. That's a beautiful beach. Because I remember going there as a kid, and my dad was not aware of the nudity, and I didn't care, because I was like 10, and I was like, ooh, look at the birds. And because my whole family is bird watchers. And then people are like, why did you have no friends? I was like, I was friends with birds, thank you very much. And my dad was, I did have friends. It was called the Birds. Okay?
Yeah.
And my students love it, so shut up. And so we walked through the part where it says, clothing optional past this point. And it's like, we saw the couple we saw on the bus. Well, the car doesn't have. It's like, hey, my dad's like, why do they never look good? And my mom just says, Gerard, they're not doing it for you.
I like your mom. You do?
I like my mom too. They drove me nuts with their parents, but I love my mom. Gerard, they're not doing it for you, lives rent free in my head.
My in-laws used to always vacation there, and my brother-in-law, he was.
It might be that it is done to
reinforce.
reinforce.
Had never been reduced to the
I
bus.
see stitching.
So when he was like.
But maybe it started to
Some of this is the fibers.
No, not
That-
yet.
Yeah.
He stands up, he walks to the beach,
And
he grips his little person.
But we also
Okay.
saw on this side.
Yeah, that also you can
As
just
far as